Councilmember Kitchen, do you want to make a motion?
I move passage of all 3 items.
Okay, we're going to consider all 3 items at the same time. Is there a second to that? Councilmember Ellis seconds the motion. We have some speakers to speak. Do you want to speak first, or should I go and start recognizing people?
Well, I don't want to speak first, but I do have some questions for staff.
Okay, you want to do that first, or
Yeah,
after speakers?
I think maybe
Okay.
if we could take, and the reason I want to take that first is because there was some additional backup provided, both by our Interim Homeless Strategy Officer and by our Real Estate Office. And I think that the backup that they posted today may respond to at least some of the questions. So I just like to ask, I think I have 3 questions for them.
Go ahead.
Okay. My first question, I think, is maybe with regard to the acquisition timeline. So my understanding is that best case scenario is about a 60-day acquisition timeline. And then I'm also understanding that the ultimate price that the council, that the city might pay for something would be based on fair market value as well as negotiations. And so those are questions for you to confirm, and also if you could just briefly go over what the due diligence process is for acquisition.
Yes, Mayor and Council, Alex Gale, Interim Officer for the Office of Real Estate Services. Our typical due diligence is what we typically want to have done is a third-party appraisal of the property, lead and asbestos testing, environmental site assessment, as well as a property condition report. And so all 4 of those reports that we are having done on the property, we anticipate having those back by July 31st. If we can, depending on how those come back, we would want to, if we need to renegotiate something depending on what those reports come back as, we would hope the landowner would agree to that, and we would hopefully be able to close within 30 days of that, which would be basically by the end of August, within that time frame from between July 31st to the end of August to close on that property. And so, yes, that is what we do is we have a third-party appraisal completed on that property, which within the backup, we also talk about the difference between what that third-party appraisal is compared to what the Travis County Appraisal District's assessed value is, and what those differences are depending on the timing of when we do it. We also, when our appraisal consultant actually is able to go into the property and see what upgrades are done to that property to understand it, as well as when TCAT assesses the value, there are some possible exemptions that are taken into consideration for that assessed value. And then as well as whenever a landowner definitely has a financial motive to successfully try and lower what that assessed value is. And so that's what some of those differences are between what our fair market value may be compared to what the TCAT assessed value is.
Okay, thank you. And is it accurate to state that as a city, we don't pay more than fair market value, and that's one reason we do appraisals?
Correct.
Okay.
So for every property that we want to acquire, we have a third-party appraisal done to determine what that fair market value is, and so we want to make sure that we don't pay anything more than what is fair market value for the property.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 questions for our Homeless Strategy Officer. And thank you. So, and this is also information that is in backup. Could you just speak to the process that you all went through? And, I don't know if that's you and real estate or whoever went through, that the staff went through for the process of searching for a property after the council voted to initiate this process on January 31st. So could you just speak to the process you all went through for searching a property?
Councilmember Veronica Briceño, I'm the Interim Homeless Strategy Officer. We did begin our process after passage of this resolution from Council. It included not only working with the individuals in our own office, but also a team across the city, including individuals from our housing department, our health department, and our real estate office. In looking at properties, the resolution, as you recall, referred to looking at both city-owned land and properties that are on the market. We evaluated about 30 city-owned properties, as well as about 70 privately owned properties through this process. When we're vetting processes, we looked at the list of criteria that were outlined in that resolution, including not directly adjacent to a neighborhood, proximity to major corridors, access to public transportation, site and size acreage of the property, access to health care, access to case management and social service providers, and the current condition of the site, as well as any environmental considerations. So with that list of criteria, the majority of the properties were eliminated, and that's how we were able to move forward this recommendation of the site that you're considering today.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question, if you could speak to it with regard to, and this is also in the backup, the community outreach process. And also, we've talked about the fact that this is in the backup, that one of the aspects of this item, of item 179, is to develop a legally binding restriction on the property. I'll speak to that more later because I do have some direction with regard to pursuing that legally binding restriction. But I know that you have in your backup some language about the process of community outreach. So could you speak to that?
Absolutely. We have been having discussions with our community engagement team here at the City of Austin on how we can work with not only the community at large, but also the immediate, the neighbors in the vicinity, the residents in the vicinity, as well as business owners in the vicinity, and in addition to our stakeholders that are working in this area of homelessness. We will, as we move forward with the item today, we will develop a plan so that we can receive input on how we as a city can be a good neighbor on this property. We want to take into account the concerns of the residents and the business owners in the immediate area.
Okay, thank you. I'll speak to my direction later, and that direction relates to the restrictions on the property and the process of working with the community to develop those restrictions. So thank you. That's all the questions I have right now.
So I'm going to call. The first speaker is going to be Ray Collins. Is Mr. Collins here? And then on deck will be Ellis Peterson. Is Ellis Peterson here? You'll be up at this podium. You have time donated by Sean Whalen. Is Sean Whalen here? Okay, so when you come up, Mr. Peterson, you'll have 5 minutes. Mr. Collins, you have 3 minutes. Yeah, you can go ahead.
May I have a slide, please? My name is Ray Collins. This is slide you're about to see is ECHO Executive Director Ann Howard's slide at 8:14 into her council work session briefing on February 13th, 2018. I bring it to you today to call your attention to Councilmember Kazar's remarks at the June 4th council work session to the effect that the capacity of the proposed housing-focused shelter on Ben White must balance facility funding and services funding. An imbalance of the two will not allow the shelter to operate within the NAEH guidelines council has chosen. The proposed capacity is 50 to 100 beds. My interest is that the number of people actually in residence be frequently evaluated and adjusted to the NAEH guidelines, taking into account our present limitations on outflow and future improvement of same. I say to you that this is essential for success as portrayed in the slide, and that the success of this Ben White facility is essential to model future facilities around Austin. Slide off, please. Finally, I want to identify myself as one of the supporters of a housing-focused shelter who is interested in having the NAEH guidelines codified in a restrictive covenant. I can see we're thinking along the same lines. Up to and including closure of the facility if the NAEH guidelines are not achieved. I'm going to be involved at some level in the restrictive covenant discussion simply because I know some of the people involved. And if council chooses, I would appreciate being involved as chair of the contact team in the budding area to the south. Finally, I hope council will acknowledge, as I do, that City Manager Cronk has accomplished an amazing feat. He's located a property literally a stone's throw from campers in the Greenbelt, near people living under Ben White, a little under 2 miles from Austin's most successful nonprofit for finding housing, on a Cap Metro route, and near health care. All this while successfully executing council's direction that the property not be adjacent to a residential neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nizam Zadeh will be up here. Introduce yourself, please. You have 3 minutes.
Sure. Evelio, Astray-Caneda. Good afternoon, council members. I live 1.8 miles from the new transitional housing that's being proposed. I am just here to share that there are some of us in the community who are not threatened by this and do not fear it, and are, in fact, happy to welcome a place of transition where people can find a new life and a new way forward. I think there's a lot of confusion that people in the community have that this will become Arch 2.0. Those of us who've read through the material so graciously provided by much of the council understand that that's not the case. You can't walk in the front door here and get services. You need to be referred in, from what I understand. That makes a massive difference. No one has a need to camp out outside waiting for that. I know you're going to hear many voices today that are very worried about this. Many people who are going to say this was never zoned for this. This is too expensive. Well, Austin's a changing city with a growing homeless population. We see many of them under the bridges of Ben White. And this is a great way, I think, to address it. And there are people like myself who are eager to stand up, welcome it, and you may even see volunteering there and bringing our skills. So thank you for your care in this selection.
Thank you. Is all the speakers we have? We're back up to the dais. Councilmember Kitchen.
There's a number of things I'd like to speak to. So basically that fall into 2 categories. So if I
Go ahead.
Okay. First off, I do want to thank everyone that came down today, and I want to speak to one thing that I believe that everyone is saying, whether you're for a shelter or not. I hear everyone talking about the concerns that we all have for the South Austin area, and it's not just in South Austin, it's in other parts of the city now. We are way past time to really come to grips with the issues in our community around homelessness. We have concerns about people having a place to live, to be clean and safe. We have concerns ourselves in our neighborhoods about feeling safe. These are all very, very real, and I really appreciate the urgency and the passion with which you are speaking to us. And I hear that. We have got to take action. So one thing I want to talk about is I'm looking forward to the discussion in a little bit this evening that we will have about camping. Much of what you are talking about is the just horrific situation that we're seeing in terms of people living under bridges and in green belts with no place to go to the bathroom, no place to be clean, no place to store their items, and all the things that you all are experiencing, from your public safety concerns about addiction, concerns about other things that are going on the streets. So we have to address that. We have 2 items coming up to us in the evening that I look forward to working with my colleagues on that will take head on the issue of camping. So we need to make changes to the camping ordinance that we have right now. It's obviously not working. So I thank the mayor for the item he's brought up, and we'll have more conversations about that. And that one speaks to much of the recommendations that you all have made about coming to grips with the issues around camping. We also have ordinance that Councilmember Kassar has brought forward and others that comes to grips with the fact that our current camping ordinance, by criminalizing people that are not committing crimes, doesn't address the problem either. So I want to speak to that because I recognize and I understand and I support the concerns you are raising, and I think you'll see this council take action on those. I want to talk about the shelter right now and about the direction that I've passed out on the dais related to the legal restrictions. A couple of things I need to say. I think people are concerned, or this is what I'm hearing, that people are concerned that a housing-focused shelter will make the problem worse. And I understand that concern. I think there are things that we must do to make sure that that doesn't happen, and I think we can. And I think we must, because letting the situation stay the way it is, just letting people continue to live in a place where they're not safe or healthy is not humane for them. It is not is not progress. So the house, I understand.
Hey, please.
I understand that you don't trust the city because you haven't seen any change. Shall I go ahead?
Please.
Okay, so let me just say a couple of things. A housing-focused shelter is not a camp. It's not a camp under an overpass. It is not what the Arch has been in the past. And I want to thank the people at the Arch that are working on improvements there. It is not that. It is not a Sunrise drop-in center. And I want to thank the folks at Sunrise that do the work that they can do. What this is this is a place for people to live. It is no, that is not correct. Okay, let me.
No, excuse me. If you want to stay, you have to listen to the people talk. You've had a chance to speak. It is now time for people to speak from the dais.
So I want to.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So the information I'd like to share is that a housing-focused shelter is a place that's secure, welcoming place for people to live while they're being connected to services. It's not a drop-in center. It's not a place where people come and go. It's not a place where people stay for a certain amount of time and then they're back out on the streets. That's not what a housing-focused shelter is. It is a place where people are referred by case managers in the system that have assessed them and say that they're ready to come to this place. They get services to help them find more permanent housing. They go on from this place to more permanent housing off the street. The services are geared to allowing self-sufficiency and meeting daily needs. Like I said before, it's not a drop-in center. Individuals that are not staying at the center are not allowed to gather outside. People do not knock on the door and ask for services. People are referred by agencies. There's no drop-in services. There's no intake location. So, but I think it's important that all of those things are captured in a legally binding instrument. And so I'd like to call my colleagues' attention to the direction that I've passed out. And the direction is that, and I'll read it for folks, is that staff shall bring back for council approval an enforceable legal instrument which applies the restrictions necessary to the property and its operation for achieving the purposes of providing housing-focused shelter and services according to best practices and of being a good neighbor. Through consultation with the National Alliance to End Homelessness and public input, which our Homeless Strategy Officer spoke to earlier, and public input over the next 60 days at least, the legal instrument shall establish terms of operational safety and effectiveness, including but not limited to, first, not exceeding 100 beds at the center. Second, prohibition of drop-ins. Third, provision of day services only being available to individuals who are actually living at the center. Fourth, prohibition on camping around the facility. That means enforcing no trespassing. Fifth, additional measures that secure the property. For example, there's been some discussion of potential for fencing. The last one is any other measures necessary for best practice operations. And so I would ask my colleagues to support adding that direction to this item.
Is there any further discussion on the dais on this item? We've called up item.
Your state representative.
So I want to say that the kinds of concerns that are raised by the neighbor, these are not the first time I've heard these concerns. Probably all of us have gotten thousands of emails from people around the city raising the same kind of concerns. I've had countless number of people come into my office to express these very same concerns. And I've also gone around the city, joined neighbors and walked through camps, walked through neighborhoods, spoken with folks that are experiencing homelessness, both with and without neighbors. The reports of bloody syringes and people exposing themselves to children, people sleeping or blocking streets. And it's not something which is just in this particular neighborhood, although under Pack Saddle at Ben White, it's a considerable problem. It's also not just under I-35 at that Slaughter. It is also not just downtown. It is all over the city. And all over the city, people are coming in and saying the status quo, whatever it is that you're doing now, is not working. You have to do something else. Usually that's accompanied by saying, and stop studying this thing and actually start doing something. We don't have to study it anymore because we've already studied this so many times. We know what the answers are. We know what the folks tell us, what the experts tell us to do. And the only question for us is whether or not we have the political will to put the resources against it and the political and community will to actually take the steps. I cannot participate any longer in not acting. I cannot participate any longer in not setting up the structure and the system to fundamentally do something to change the status quo in this city, because the status quo on this issue is killing us. I am proud to be part of a city council that has recognized this. We just went through a strategic planning process as a council in the city, and goodness knows there are lots of things that a lot of people want all over this city. We want more parks, we want better transportation, we want, the list goes on and on and on. But the number one thing this council set as the highest priority for us to deal with is the challenge we have with homelessness in our city. The number one priority. It's about time. And manager, thank you for coming on board and identifying this and saying we need one person in this city that wakes up every morning and goes to sleep every night, and this is the only thing that they think about. This is their job. Thank you for pulling back the process for selecting that person so as to elevate it, make it an executive level position and paying more money for that. And now that the application period is over, I hope you fill that position post haste. And I'm encouraged with the indications that we have real good applicants for that position. I'm proud to be part of a council and a community that passed the largest housing bond in the history of the city at $250 million, part of which is to actually fund doing stuff that is real in this city. Putting with that the $30 million we're going to be able to harvest from the Waller Creek TIF, as we kept room in the park funding so that we could actually earmark money to be spent on homelessness. I'm happy to be part of a city that put $8.5 million in the last budget toward homelessness priorities, moving it from other priorities in the city to this area. I'm proud to be part of a city that has begun to actually take steps. Now, what we're told from the experts is, unfortunately, there's not one step we can do that makes this work, that it's a continuum. There's a series of things that have to happen for this to be able to work. What we have to do is we have to be able to find people that are homeless and move them into a shelter that acts as a triage center so that they can be assessed to determine what it is that they need. Do they need mental health support? Do they need a job? What kind of doctor do they need? What kind of employment do they need? What do they need? They need, and they need a home. So how do we get them in a home? How does a city do that like ours? What we know is that if we don't do these things, if we don't build out the continuum, if we are willing to accept the status quo, that is the recipe for us ending up like Los Angeles and Seattle and Portland and Oregon, and I refuse to sit by and maintain the status quo and not act and leave us on that path where we end up like those other cities. I want to also compliment Councilmember Kitchen, because it is a brave thing to do, to stand up and say, we're going to take a piece of that continuum, we're going to put some of the hardest pieces, the shelter, we're going to put that somewhere in your district, which also happens to be in my district too. And we look at each other on the dais, I think we have to make the commitment that every one of us is going to step up and act in the example of Councilmember Kitchen, because we're going to locate this kind of thing all over the city, because we have to locate it all over the city, because we can't let any one of these places get too big, because the experts tell us that if we do that, it's not going to work. So every one of us up here is going to have their day like this on the dais in order for us to be able to get done what has to get done in this city. But by God, we have to do it. We have to actually show the resolve to get this done. And when they're in the shelter, we have to provide the resources necessary to provide the home exit strategy so that when somebody goes in that shelter, they get the assessment and that they get the wraparound services that they need and they get moved into permanent supportive housing. You know, we were successful when we focused on the veterans population. We did this as a small, almost pilot program. And we got to the place in this community focusing with veterans, homeless veterans on the street, by putting in places for them along that continuum so that they could get into homes. And many of those veterans are now back out in our community, participating in the community outside of this system, but they are only doing that because we provided the opportunity and the pathway for them to be able to get out of the situation that they were in. We have to put the money and the resources and the political commitment where our words are and get that done, because we know from experience in this city, if we focus on a problem, we can in fact deal with it. This is a city that last year got half of the children in our city that were on our streets off the streets in a pilot program that we now need to expand. Now, this is going to be hard for us to do because the legislature just capped our revenue. And they capped our revenue, and if we keep our existing budget, we're $58 million upside down in 3 years. And in the face of that budget, which says we're going to have to cut existing programs and things that were existing in that budget, we're going to have to rally above that and say, not only are we going to do that, but we're also going to make room to deal with this, our number one priority. But we have set this as our number one priority. There are other things that we're going to be considering the rest of this evening on this issue. They all go together. We have ordinances out on our street that we know are not working. We have ordinances on the street that issued 18,000 tickets between 2014 and 2016, and clearly it did nothing to effectively manage this problem. Our law enforcement people interpreted it differently, brought the number of tickets down between 2016 and 2018, and still it's not the answer. That's not the answer. The other resolution we have tonight is asking the manager to come back here quick in August with telling us, okay, if we're going to tell people you can't camp there, where can they camp? And how do we do that in a way that protects the rest of our city? I look forward to us being able to consider those other resolutions, but even those resolutions are not enough. We hear the Councilmember Tovo's bringing another set of resolution to us in August when we come back. This has to be our focus. This has to be the ball we don't take our eyes off of. This is the moment and the time to do that. We have a gift in this city right now. And the gift that we have in this city is that we have a community that is generally united in wanting to deal with this problem. We have not gotten to the place in this community where we demonize the people that are homeless, because as soon as we treat this like another political battle where we each choose sides on this issue and demonize the people on the other side of the issue and demonize the people who are homeless, we know again what that gets us. Because all you have to do again is look at Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle and Portland today, and that's what you see. We are not there yet. We can't let that worm turn. But I will tell you, if we just maintain the status quo and try to get by on what we're doing now, that will be the very next thing that happens in our community. We have to act. I understand the fears. I hear the fears. And Manager, I will say to you that if we have any hope of being able to develop in this city the resources we need, then people need to look back at this location and say, okay, it did not develop the way we feared it might. Because if it develops that way, there won't be another one. And this one will get shut down. And we have to do better than that, which means the entire city's eyes are on this project, on this location, on what we're doing to help with the shelter at the Salvation Army. The entire eyes are on what we're doing here, and we have to make it work if we're going to expect to fill out the continuum that we need. I hear the neighborhood. I hear the fears. I know them. I have walked that area on Pack Saddle and Ben White with people in the neighborhood. We have to do the job. We have to treat it as the priority. We are all in this together. It's going to touch all of us. I appreciate this resolution. I'm going to vote for it. Further discussion on the dais.